So a good few people have asked about pairing tunes. In the Irish world, it's fairly common to put the tunes together in medleys of 2, 3, 4 tunes. And I'm often asked, how do you choose which pieces to put together? And the short answer is just trial and error. And if I like the way it sounds going from one tune to another, then it works for me. And if I don't like the way it sounds, next time I play a particular tune, I'll go into something else. So it's a very free process. You know, there aren't any rules that I'm aware of. But there are a few points that I can bring to your attention. Traditionally, in Ireland, the medleys are all of the same type of tune. You might put 2 or 3 jigs together, or 2 or 3 reels together, or 2 or 3 hornpipes. It's very rare that you would play a jig and then play a reel, or play a reel and then play a polka, or play a slip jig and then play a hornpipe. Some of the groups, some of the recordings from the late 70s and onwards have tracks like that, you know, groups, medleys of tunes where they switch rhythm. But in Ireland, that would be considered more experimental. In Scotland, however, they do have a tradition of putting the medleys together with groups of tunes that have different rhythms and different tempos. And typically, you'd start with a very in Scotland, you'd start with a very slow tune, and the next tune after that would be a slightly quicker tune. The third one would gather pace even more, and the fourth one would be fast. And the tempo, the energy of the dance would develop as it goes on, getting faster and faster and faster, and then everyone collapses in a heap of exhaustion. Well, not quite, but that's the idea. It builds and builds and builds, and the end is very exciting. Whereas the Irish custom is to keep it fairly steady. There might be a slight build in tempo, but most people would expect to start and finish around the same speeds. And as I said, they wouldn't normally alter the rhythms between the tunes. So if you start off playing a slide, you'll probably end up playing a slide. It's rare that you'd insert something different in between. Now, I said rare. It's you know, it does happen, but it's not a standard thing. Certain tunes have certain moods. Sometimes they're very happy tunes, or a little bit pensive, or very rhythmic, or very melodic and not too rhythmic. And sometimes I like to put a few of those tunes together that have a similar mood. But also the reverse of that. If I have 3 tunes together that are in the same mood, I might start to think, I don't want that whole 5 minutes of music to be all in the same mood. We've got plenty of time here to take a little wander through different moods. So I might start off with a kind of a mid-tempo tune, that is a little bit busy, but not too florid, not too exciting, kind of a gentle approach to a reel. And then I might go into a middle tune that would be a little bit somber, a little bit dark sounding. And then for the third one, play something that sounds strong and vigorous. So we'd have taken a little journey, something that's fairly middle of the road into something a bit dark, and then we finish on a strong, happy note. But sometimes that's not the shape you want. Sometimes you start a little bit dark, and then you brighten it up, and then you finish with something strong, or less often, but sometimes you taper it down. You gradually bring it down to something very gentle and soft. So all those ideas are valid. The key changes often would influence the mood. If you go from D to A, it's usually a very strong, uplifting, vigorous kind of a sound when you change from one to the other. And also when you go back from A to D, sometimes it has a similar effect. So that's something you can bear in mind. The minor tunes, of course, typically, even if they're fast and quite vigorous, because they're in the minor key, they often have that little cloud hanging over them. Not quite as boisterous, perhaps. The minor tunes always have this hint of wistful, pensive attitude hanging around, even if rhythmically they're quite aggressive. It's always tempered by that minor sound, whereas the major keys tend to be a lot more outgoing in nature. So you can use the key changes to alter the mood of the medley. And also, as I mentioned earlier, some tunes are very rhythmic and some tunes are a lot more melodic. And it's nice to switch between the two. Play a melodic piece followed by a rhythmic piece and back to a melodic piece. So they're the kind of ideas I keep in mind when I'm putting tunes together. But the main judge to me is the way it affects me personally, and I gauge that on the sound. I can guess what two tunes together might sound like, but when I actually hear them, often I realise that my preconceived hunch actually wasn't too accurate. So until I hear it, I don't really know how it's going to sound, which is why I started this little talk about putting tunes together. I started off by saying it's a lot of trial and error. Something else to bear in mind is some of the sets of tunes are already made, mainly because of recordings. The older generation in Sligo that I grew up listening to were all fans of the great recordings by Michael Coleman and Paddy Killore and James Morris and Hughie Gillespie, and they would often pair the tunes together the same as the recordings of their favourite musicians. So if you meet someone from around the Sligo area and he he's an older gentleman or she's an older woman, and she starts off with the Tarbolton, you can bet your life the next tune is going to be the Longford Collector, and the third one is going to be the Sailor's Bonnet, because that's how Michael Coleman put those three together. Similarly, if they start playing Down the Broom, it's quite likely that the next one is going to be the Gatehouse Maid, because that's what Paddy Killorn recorded. And of course the younger generation have grown up listening to different records, Planxty records, the Dannon records, the Botty Band, so they might have heard the Green Groves of Erin played by the Botty Band, and therefore they put the Flowers of Red Hill after it every time they play, because that's how they came to those two tunes. So a lot of the time the medleys are already in place, and in sessions, if you're with a bunch of people who you guess grew up listening to their Dannon, it's quite likely when they start a tune that they learned from the Dannon record, they'll follow it with the next tune from the same record. And similarly, if you are listening to some people who might have grown up listening to Alton, they'd follow the same path. So often people don't just learn the tunes, they learn the set, and then they keep that in place, and it becomes a kind of a standard set of tunes. So I don't know if I've been very much help, but I have been asked that question, and this is the best answer I can give you. Hope it helps.